All right. Well, welcome everybody to Friends, Food, and Faith. We're still kind of gathering here, but that's all right. So we're going to just get started first with a prayer. Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. Almighty Father, as we come here tonight, fill us with your wisdom, with your knowledge, and we discern well your call for us, especially in the political process we prepare for another election. With all the issues that we face, give us grace, give us charity. We ask Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen. Yeah.
Great.
Amen. Amen.
So maybe it's good to start with a kind of an opening question. So the topic tonight is really why should Catholics get involved in the political process, right? So what that would mean primarily is not necessarily even the political process of the United States, but like at the heart of this is what is the obligation, what is the responsibility, what is the practice of of a good Catholic within whatever state they're living in, right? So let's say you don't have a democracy, or in this case, a republic. Also, we have a special guest, Father Vince will be joining us here, so he can maybe get some input on this too. And maybe you get some input from his culture being in Uganda, even though Uganda is a democratic country. But also when it comes to like living in like a kingdom, like we don't necessarily have a president or elected official that it rules. Now, of course, today that's kind of few and far between. But if I were to have, let's say, a king, what is my obligation to that king, right? In the same way, what is my obligation to the government which I live, right? So Thomas Aquinas in the Summa stated that there's certain people and certain entities that we can never repay, right? When we're talking about the act of justice, what is justice? Justice is giving to one what one is due, right? And you can have a negative connotation of that, meaning, well, if I do a crime, I maybe deserve punishment. And there's a positive connotation of that if something given to me, I should reciprocate in gratitude, something, right? So the entities that Thomas Aquinas argues that can never be repaid is, first of all, God, right? We cannot repay to God everything that God has given us. That's impossible. Being that he's an infinite being, we are finite. There's no way. It's just impossible to do that. Secondly, he would say that the other entity that you can never repay are your parents, right? Your parents give you life. Your parents give you, if they're good parents, obviously an upbringing, raise you properly, provide education, provide food, provide your clothing, your shelter, all the things you would need as a human being, and more so, including affection and love, right? You can never repay back your parents for everything they give you. And thirdly, he would argue you can never repay the state, right, for what they give you, which is primarily protection, right? Freedoms, you would hope, right? Laws, right? Society. So these are things you just can never repay, whereas individuals you can, right? So if Father Vincent gives me $5, I can justice owe him $5, and I can do that very easily. Here's $5. So when it comes to the state, okay, well, the church doesn't necessarily differentiate the type of state, right? So if I have a state that's ruled by the king, because that king has provided these things for me, I can never repay him. So then what do I actually owe him? Well, I owe that king, provided that king also has the best interest of a subject at heart, my loyalty, right? My obedience in that respect. But notice it's dependent on the goodness that the king is trying to do.
Is he just?
Right. Or not even just, but even charitable. Like, so in other words, is the king looking out for his subjects or not? Or the queen for that matter? If the answer to that is no, well then I don't have any obligation in that respect, right? As a matter of fact, I am obligated to act against that, especially if it's kind of a force of will against me in my own conscience, especially, right? So in other words, if the king were to push down, okay, which we've seen in the past, you must kill every firstborn in the land, right? No, right? So no, I do not owe you that loyalty, that obedience, because that's against my conscience of taking a human life, right? I am not obligated to do that because it's against my conscience. So in the same way, if we have a democracy, or in our case here in the United States, a republic, right? We don't have a democracy. We have a republic. We have representatives that represent the people that we do elect, but they are the ones that actually uh, elect the president for electoral Congress. So in the same way, we owe obedience and loyalty to our government of the United States, provided they have our best interests at heart, provide us with do not violate our conscience, and provide protection for us from unjust aggressors, right? So notice I didn't say the president, I didn't say your representative, I didn't say the governor, I didn't say the mayor, I said the government, provided it provides those things. And in the same way, if we have an unjust king who is trying to violate our conscience, we also have an obligation then to act against those actions that violate our conscience. And here in the United States, we would hope that would be done non-violently. Obviously, we have things in the law that would allow for that to happen in a peaceful manner, specifically every 4 years when we have an election. So to that end, here in the United States, we have a republic where we have some allegiance, some loyalty, some obedience to the government. What does that mean, practically speaking, for us as Americans?
I'm listening.
So, yeah, please feel free to get up and do whatever you can, whatever you need to do. Primarily, it means being a good citizen, right? And so being a good citizen, we would say is not in conflict with our values, our conscience, our obligations as Christians, right? So in other words, to be a good citizen would mean I look out for my fellow citizens, right? I provide for their needs if I can. I protect them if I can. I do everything that I'm called to be as a Christian towards my fellow man, and especially those who are my neighbors, meaning we live in the same state, the same city, the same country, right? Now, with any country we live in, sometimes there are conflicts, right? There's a difference of opinion. There's a difference of maybe approaches to certain issues, and that can be all peacefully done, especially here in the United States, right? Where it gets kind of problematic is, okay, well, first off, how well formed are the consciences of the people that live in that particular country? And is there anything being presented that violates the conscience, or specifically the teachings of Christ and his church? If there are certain things that we present that way, we have an obligation to work against that. And if necessary, fight against that, right? Now, so I want to be very clear, nobody's calling anyone to arms, because the things that we're talking about is not something that really should start wars, that should be bring about any type of physical action, because we would also say that war in itself is intrinsically evil. It's a failure of the human person. It's a failure of truth. It's a failure of charity. It's a failure in dignity of the human person, right? So in other words, if there's anything else we can do, we should do that, right? War should be, or to pick up arms, it should be the very, very, very last resort. I personally don't think we are there, right, in this country. I don't think that's really, I think there are always going to be options in whatever country we're in. And I think it would be very evident if that would be necessary, right? So Father Madden is not calling for violence. Let's just want to be clear about that, right? So no one is doing that. Okay, so then what does that mean then, practically speaking, within our current situation as Americans? Well, in our process, we have certain primaries, we have certain procedures that present candidates for these positions of leadership, right? So primarily, we're called to pick good candidates, right? And find out who those good candidates, or if necessary, run for those positions if we think we are valid and good candidates in those positions. Now, the only stipulation is clergy are not allowed to do that, right?
Father Vincent, do you want some? I didn't know if you had eaten. I'll give you some. Right. Okay, I'm sorry. I assume you don't want any right now.
No.
Okay.
In the United States, this actually stems from there was a Catholic priest who was actually a congressperson that ran and was elected, and this Catholic congressperson congressman, was upholding laws and policies that were against Catholic teaching. Now, one could say at the time he was running, was it very clear what the teaching was? I think that's debatable. I think a Catholic priest should know what the church teaches, regardless of generation or time or anything else. And because this particular priest was doing things against what the church taught, the Holy Father put an edict out saying that clergy cannot run for any elected office.
Oh, across the board, huh?
Which really is probably good.
A good thing,
Well,
yeah.
Because you know, the church has also always upheld the separation of church and state, right? Even going back to the time of Constantine, right, back in Rome. Okay, so then with that being said, let's say we have these candidates that we pick. We vote for these candidates. We present these candidates. The real question, I think, at the heart of this is, should Catholics vote? Now, in general, that would be yes, right? But let's say you have two candidates who both support, and you know, again, you could always say, well, okay, we have a two-party system. You know, maybe we can't avoid that. You can always say if there's a third-party candidate, can you write in? Sure, you can always do that. But in general, let's say you have two candidates who are supporting intrinsically evil policies. Some theologians would argue that you should still vote even in the midst of that, right? Vote for the lesser of two evils. And this is just my personal opinion, none of these are definitively taught by the church either. I think we need to be clear about that too. I kind of take the approach that if I'm presented with two candidates that are not in line with church teaching and are promoting things that are against my conscience, I have a justification not to vote, right? Or if I do vote, to vote for a third-party candidate, right, or write-in candidate. So I think in general we want to understand that in our political system there are options when it comes to voting, right? Even though we do have a two-party system, we do have options when it comes to what we hold in our conscience, our values, to vote with our conscience. That's the whole idea here that the church would teach. You always want to vote with your conscience. Everything else comes down to a matter of prudence, right? So in other words, when I say prudence, what do you understand prudence to mean? Like, what is that?
Prudence.
Are we taking everything into exception?
In consideration?
Like into consideration?
Yeah, so
like we look at the whole thing instead of just,
yes,
looking at one.
Yes, okay,
we're analyzing it as a...
Exactly. So prudence, the basic definition is right judgment, right? I'm using the gift of intellect to discern well what should be done in a particular circumstance, right? That is a cardinal virtue, right? So it's a virtue that we receive in our baptisms, and we're called to use that prudential judgment in the voting box, right? So in other words, what does that mean? Okay, well, let's say we have an issue where there's a particular, let's say, tax abatement that would be used for a particular program to, I don't know, fix the roads. I mean, in general, you could say that's really more of an amoral issue, right? And so presented with two different options of how do you best use that money to build the roads, whether it be to a contractor or, maybe to use this material. Okay, that's more prudential judgment, right? It has really no moral bearing on the decision, right? What would be the best thing to do? That's kind of what it comes down to. That may be different, though, from, let's say, a policy that is using taxpayer money to set up a death room, whether it be for criminals or just citizens who may want to end their life, right? Okay, that's fundamentally an inherent evil and a moral decision. In which case, I, as a faithful Catholic, as someone that has a well-formed conscience, would be obligated to vote no on that measure, right?
That's why we should vote no on number 3.
Correct, and we'll get to that. We are going to get to that, right? So I just want to kind of lay the groundwork as far as like in the political system how Catholics need to navigate, right?
Right.
So the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, and here's the other thing too. The other thing to understand too, the USCCB are the Council of Bishops. They are a synod that are called to provide pastoral guidance based on the church's teaching. So what does that mean? Are any of the teachings or anything that comes from the USCCB binding?
No.
Technically, no. What would be binding is what your individual bishop declares, right? So I say that because the USCCB does put out a voter guide, right? That looks at certain issues that Catholic voters in the United States should maybe consider when
And
they.
you know, a lot of Catholics don't know that.
Correct, which is why I'm putting it on the tape.
Why we're
Right?
doing this, yeah.
So that have these particular issues that voters should keep in mind, Catholic voters especially, when they go to the ballot box, right? Now, this is not an exhaustive list, but these are kind of looking at particular moral issues. And what they do each year, especially in an election year, is they take the candidates and they put their positions based on whether it aligns with Catholic teaching, does not align with Catholic teaching, it's inconclusive, or maybe it's changed since the time they first put this out, right? Now, they do have some disclaimers on this, right? So with each candidate, they actually put a link to particular articles that support this claim, right? Now, what they say, it includes reference to policies, direct quotes from the candidates, or actions by their administration. We do not support the political biases of these websites. So the other thing is, these go to particular websites which have bias. It may be from MSNBC and maybe from Fox News, right? So what they're trying to say there is, take that into consideration. So just because it says that maybe this does not align, you need to read the articles and do the research yourself to form your own conscience and make your own decision. That's what basically the USCB is saying. This guy is not endorsed by or affiliated with the US. It's not. So in other words, USCB is kind of distancing themselves, saying, "Look, we're not responsible for this, even though it's on our website. We are not taking responsibility for this, right? These are separate parties who put this out. We're just kind of."
What they did is assemble all the information.
Exactly. They're trying to put it
our
together,
own
make their own decision. Right. Exactly. And then it's only for a starting point for your discernment. It's not meant to be conclusive, right? So we would be very clear that's what's putting out. So the issues that they tend to reflect on here is abortion, euthanasia, cloning and destruction of human embryos for research, avoiding war and promoting peace, reject the use of torture, against the preventative use of military force, work to reverse the spread of nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons, against the direct and intentional targeting of non-combatants in war or terrorist attacks, promotes the reallocation of resources from armed conflicts to the urgent needs of the poor. So in other words, does this candidate promote taking funds away from growing a military that is not necessary and use it for people who need it, especially feeding and providing their needs? Any questions about any of those issues? I mean, they're pretty straightforward, I think, right? Supporting a definition of marriage as defined, recognized, and protected as a lifelong commitment between a man and a woman.
Yeah, that's a little problematic.
Okay. Well, I mean, part of that is understanding what marriage really is. And so it's not to say that two men and two women can't have a deep friendship and even a desire for each other, but it's also a call to chastity for those even within the bond of marriage, right? So chastity is always promoted by the church, right? So in other words, does this candidate promote that? Valuing, protecting, and nurturing children. Just wages, right? Does it promote a just wage for people? Promotion of religious liberty, of course. Jobs for all who can work, and federal jobs guarantee for those who can. Removing barriers to equal pay and unemployment for women, okay, sure. Right of workers to choose whether to organize, join a union, and bargain collectively. These are really more issues of preferred option for the poor and the economic justice, right? Welfare policy and the reduction of poverty. So again, this is for people who cannot work, right? Improving the earned income tax credit and the child tax credit. So these are a little more prudential, I think, in that respect. And recognition support to faith-based groups. Renewed commitment to affordable housing and agricultural policy and food security for all to dispel hunger. Affordable and accessible health care, strengthen Medicare and Medicaid. I think that's more prudential. I don't know if that's really necessarily a moral issue. Broad and fair legalization program with a path to citizenship for migration. Family reunification policies. Reforming the broken criminal justice system, remedial rather than punitive. Supporting reasonable restrictions on access to assault weapons and handguns. That's, again, I think more of a prudential issue than moral. It's actually, I think that's why they distance themselves, because some of these seem more prudential than moral.
Yeah.
And opposing the use of the death penalty, which would be a moral issue. Combat any unjust discrimination based on religion. Combat sexism. Combat any unjust discrimination based on disabling conditions. Combat any unjust discrimination based on age. Combat racism. And combat any unjust discrimination based on ethnicity. So these are all racism issues. Seriously address global climate change. And so care of the environment is part of the Catholic social justice system. Development of alternative, renewable, and clean energy sources. Communication, media, and culture. Promoting responsible regulation of electronic media that respects freedom of speech, yet addresses low standards or offensive material. Again, I think that's kind of more of a discernment of that. Alleviation of global poverty through increased developmental aid, equitable trade policies, political and financial support to the United Nations programs and reforms. Again, I think that's more of a discernment. And actively pursue comprehensive negotiations between Israel and Palestine that ensures security for Israel and a viable state for Palestinians. So as we go through some of these things, it seems some of these may be more moral, while others may be more prudential, like discernment. So in general, we have to look at the Catholic moral teaching. So life and dignity. The Catholic Church is always going to promote life and dignity. So policies that are against life and dignity, the Church would say we have an obligation to vote against those policies. Respect for the migrant, right, which also goes in line with dignity in life. So in other words, there's kind of two extremes on this issues, right? It's either we don't let anyone in, or we let everyone in, right? So the Church will always say with these things, there's always a media via, right? There's a middle way. So in other words, do we have a way that we can actually, let's say for someone who is coming from their home country because they are experiencing persecution for their religion, maybe they're experiencing death threats from the government, maybe they're experiencing extreme poverty, want better life for their families, right? These are all justified reasons to move to another country.
These are why our parents came here.
Right. And we would say,
you have to do it the right way.
well, so that's the point,
Yeah,
right? Now, as a country, we also have the right to protect ourselves from those who may want to harm us, right? So, okay, is there policies that do that, right? So, okay, putting up a wall, all right, that's not, in general, that's not a bad thing, but are there openness ports of entry which can have people go to that can be vetted properly, and then if they meet those criteria, they can have a path to citizenship within our country.
A lot of countries have it. Germany had it,
Right.
Canada has it.
Right. So I think the problem we see with our two candidates right now in the two parties is that you have those extremes, right? You have one that says, nope, nobody in, and the other one says, let them all in general.
I don't think she says that.
Well, I mean, I think the policies, though, we have to look at more of the policies than maybe the words. I don't know.
The present government doesn't have a proper policy
Right.
for the border. We
Right.
have to have a border.
I agree with that.
We have to have a border
Right.
for our country.
Yes. So again, I mean, when it comes to these discernments, we have to look at these things and say, okay, what is the best thing to do? And if neither candidate has a policy that really could work, then, okay, well, what do we do, right?
We look at their other policies, we see if there's something.
Yeah. So
you
that's
know,
right. And so yeah, okay, then maybe we can go to, let's say, all right, just wage, right? Workers, right? People have a right to work. There's dignity in work. They should get a wage that is befitting the dignity of the human person that can provide for the needs of themselves and their families, right? So the two extremes of that is, okay, well, let's try to keep those as low as possible, right? And not let any movement happen economically. Or let's just like blow the roof off the place and let, wages soar, right? you know, they both have complications, both have issues that could be problematic. So again, the church always looks at a mid via here, right? So are there ways that we can give a just wage that supports families, allows for good mobility, and also can protect the economic stability of a country?
Of a country, yeah, because
right. So again, these are things that are moral issues that we have to consider in the voting box, right? Responsibility for our environment, right? That is a moral teaching that we have a responsibility as human beings endowed with intellect and made in the image and likeness of God to protect God's creation, right? So, okay, are there policies, or are there the candidate that has policies that support that, right? And the extremes there are, let's just, you know, pump all the oil we can and, you know, the old natural gas and exploit all the resources that we possibly can. And are there ways we can maybe find renewable energies, renewable ways of sustaining our current lifestyle without also bankrupting the country, right? Because that's another thing too that needs to become is the economic
cost of
right.
saving
right
ourselves.
So again, you know, I want to preface by saying that no candidate completely aligns with the church's teachings. Neither one do. For sure. And so that's why the church would never support or endorse one over the other, right? Because they don't. Now, of these things, we are called in our conscience to give weight to that. So in other words,
does the morality of the candidate themselves,
okay,
relevant?
Not in this realm, right? Because what we're looking at is issues, right? So you can say, I don't like this person, okay? And maybe that's a prudential judgment you would make, right? Mm-hmm. But that would not necessarily be a moral judgment, right? And what that would go with is, you know, judge not lest ye be judged, right? I mean, so in other words, no human being on this earth is completely perfect. And if we're looking for a perfect person to be our candidate, well, we had two of them and they're no longer really on this earth, right? So in other words, it's perfectly reasonable to say this person's character may not be in line with my values, and that might be a factor for me. But that wouldn't be a moral factor, because we wouldn't say you want to judge them, because you're not in the situation to do that. That would be up to God and that person. But you can put that as a potential issue of saying, I don't get a good vibe for them. Mm-hmm. Now, I think what the church would say is that should maybe have some low weight in the way you actually assess the moral issues that are actually present in the voter box, right? So in other words,
I totally agree with that.
So in other words, you can have that as a factor, but that should really be a very, very low factor. It shouldn't be your primary reason to vote or not vote for somebody. Because here's what the church would say. What's that?
We've had presidents on both sides of the aisle do great things, but weren't really morally great people. So for that much, I mean, I can see that, you know.
Right. And so that's what I'm saying. I mean, you could say that I don't like this person, right? Okay. But should that weigh in whether you vote for them or not? I don't know if you can really help that. I mean, sometimes we all have our own biases for sure. So, I mean, but when we're talking about just by the morality, we're really looking at the issues and the policies that are put out. So in that end, the church asks, or one may ask, is each issue weighted the same? Well, the church would say that the bishops warn we must not say that each issue is morally equal, because some issues are more important than others, right? And we should also not dismiss or ignore other serious threats to human life and dignity, right? So, in other words, well, they're not all weighted equally based on how you form your conscience, right? So is each issue worth the same amount of points, so to speak, right? Mm-hmm. No. The issues are not weighted the same, but all the issues are connected, right? So those issues we were talking about, life and dignity, the migrant, just wages, providing for the
treated
environment,
after
right?
being arrested.
Yeah, they are all related to each other in promoting life and dignity, right?
Mhm.
So then the question may be, the bishop defined two types of issues: intrinsically evil issues. So in other words, shutting out the migrant completely, killing the infant in the womb, or to the extreme end, killing elderly people who determined to have no use, whatever that means, right? Basically having wages to the point where it's unlivable, right? That you cannot provide for food and the basic needs of your family and yourself, right? Throwing garbage everywhere and destroying the oceans and the rivers and everything, those are intrinsically evil things that we as Catholics can say we cannot support that, right? Then so the intrinsically evil actions, they go a little further. There are some things we must never do as individuals or as society because they are always incompatible with love of God and neighbor. Such actions are so deeply flawed that they are always opposed to the authentic good of persons. These are called intrinsically evil actions. They must always be rejected and opposed and must never be supported or condoned. A list of intrinsically evil actions directly quoted in paragraph 22 and 23 from the, I don't know what that's from. That's interesting. I don't know if that's the Catechism or if that's, no, that would be later in the Catechism. That may be from another document. Racism, treating workers as mere means to an end. So again, that just wage, right? Destructive research on human embryos, genocide, torture, abortion, targeting of non-combatants in acts of terror or war, euthanasia, human cloning, deliberately subjecting workers to subhuman living conditions, treating the poor as disposable, and then redefining marriage to deny its essential meaning, right? Other serious threats to human life and dignity, these are not intrinsically evil at the moment they're carried out, but they pose a risk to humanity in the future and threaten the lives of poor and vulnerable human persons here and now. These are not optional concerns which can be dismissed. And those would be war crimes, the failure to respond to those who are suffering from hunger or lack of health care, an unjust immigration policy, pornography, compromising religious liberty. So all the life issues are connected for erosion of respect for the life of any individual or group in society necessarily diminishes respect for all life. So in other words, if we're going to diminish someone, by de facto, you would diminish everybody. We must consider all the issues when voting, especially the ones that are intrinsically evil actions. We must have a renewed consideration for the issues that indirectly attack human dignity because all the life issues are connected, as we just said. So, after all this, can a Catholic in good conscience vote for a candidate who supports an intrinsically evil action?
Now with good conscience, right?
Well, okay, so according to the bishops of the USCCB, yes, they can, provided that the candidate, despite the fact that they support these positions for other morally grave reasons, when we perceive the proper relationship among moral goods, this means that Catholics can vote for a non-pro-life candidate, for instance, if his or her stance on the other moral goods demand our attention because of morally grave reasons. So what that may look like is, okay, this particular candidate is pro-abortion, and maybe pro-abortion up to 9.
No one's pro-abortion, don't say that.
Well, what I'm saying is, what this candidate's policies allow for abortion up to 9 months. Okay, so all right, well that's intrinsically evil, but this candidate also has a plan that's very reasonable to stop the war that's happening between these two countries, right? Or the war between our particular country and another country, right? Well, all right, so to that end, Catholics cannot vote for a candidate because they support positions that allow intrinsic moral evils to be permitted. But Catholics can vote for a candidate who supports certain intrinsically evil actions to limit the damage caused by the actions of opposing candidates.
I like these guys.
So what that would look like, though,
The bishop.
is
I'm kidding. It's a joke.
is, okay, so let's say you have a candidate that maybe would, or let's say, okay, let's put it this way. You have a candidate that has a policy that allows abortion up to 9 months. You have a candidate that allows abortion up to 6 months, right? So in other words, they're both allowing for abortion, but this one limits the action, right? So I have a moral responsibility to actually vote for that one, right? But the responsibility to make choices in political life rests with each individual in light of a properly formed conscience, and that participation goes well beyond casting a vote in a particular election. So in other words, can a particular policy have ramifications that are intrinsically evil down the road, even though right now they're not?
What's an example of that?
Well, okay, let's say you have a candidate that promotes a policy that is going to totally exhaust our, let's say, oil reserve in the United States, without a plan to replace that, right? I can see that, okay, well, that doesn't seem like that would be good for anybody, right? Because that will raise prices of oil and gas. That would cause workers to probably, have to adjust their policies, or maybe it doesn't. That could lead to more destitute people. That could also lead to more poverty, which also could affect abortion rates and everything else, right? So if they're all interconnected, I can look and see down the road that if this policy is put in place, even though right now it may not really be a problem, it could have ramifications in the future, which could be moral issues.
I gotcha.
Okay, all right. Can Catholics be single issue voters?
I don't think so.
According to the USCCB, no. A candidate's position on a single issue is not sufficient to guarantee a voter's support, right? So just because you maybe have a candidate that is says get rid of abortion completely, but they have policies that are like, let's go attack all our neighbors and destroy and take their resources, but also by the same time, let's limit the wages for our workers and reduce it. And also, while in the meantime, we're going to pollute the environment. Okay, well, I can't support that because these other intrinsically evil actions outweigh the fact that this person is allowing for birth, right? So a Catholic voter can disqualify a candidate based on a single, but Catholics may legitimately disqualify a candidate from receiving support if a candidate's position on a single issue promotes an intrinsically evil act. So in other words, let's reverse that. Let's say that we have a candidate that is going to promote peace, has policies that put in place to ensure that peace is going to be done, that they promote the just wage for workers to the point where, right, good the environment, but their policy allows for abortion up to 9 months and even euthanasia. Okay, I can disqualify that candidate.
There's not anywhere in the United States that allows for abortion up to 9 months, is there?
New York,
Am I that ignorant?
New York, California.
Seriously?
Yes.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
How can that be? Okay, well, I'm ignorant.
I mean, yeah.
I'm lucky to know what's going on in Missouri.
Yeah. I mean, that's also so, and we'll get to that in 1 second, because Amendment 3 also is going to allow for that if it is passed. So yes.
I didn't.
Okay. Yeah. So, and we'll talk about that in a second, and that'll be talked about all through October too. But we'll get to that, right? So, so what that means is I can say I can't necessarily vote for that person. I can't vote for that, but I can also disqualify it, meaning maybe I won't vote at all, or maybe I'm going to have a different candidate that I can vote for instead of that particular candidate, right? Write-in a candidate, maybe, right? So again, this is sort of a discernment in that respect. And unfortunately, in our society, our candidates, since I can just say this personally, every candidate that I've ever been in an election for has always upheld some intrinsically evil policy.
Right? Everyone. You know, everyone who voted, if you've paid attention to the issues and you're at least have care in this world,
right?
We all have different feelings on different issues.
Correct.
No matter who you voted for, you're always like, man, but I I wish that person was a little bit different on this, but I'm going to go ahead and vote for him because all these other things are kind of what I'm
which is why I say, like, it also is morally listed to say I'm not going to vote this one, right? Or or maybe I'm going to write a candidate. Yeah,
not to
right, exactly.
the opposite. Like
exactly.
you're supposed to vote. You're supposed to vote.
Right, exactly. And that's the thing. I mean, voting is good. I'm not saying voting is bad. I think we should vote if we can, right? But also, based on what the bishop is saying here, we could justify saying I can't participate in this, right? So it comes down to a level of your conscience, right, and your weight there. So in summary, a Catholic voter can disqualify a candidate based on a single issue, but they cannot vote for a candidate based on a single issue. And Catholics can be single issue disqualifiers, but not single issue voters. The responsibility to make choices in political life rests with each individual in light of a properly formed conscience, and that participation goes well beyond casting a vote in a particular election. So before we go any further, one thing I want to bring up is when we talk about the moral life in morality, there are two ways that we participate in evil, right? Because all of us do in some way, right? We could participate in evil what we call formally, right? Meaning I actually in condoning this action or even doing the action to bring about an evil, right? That'd be formally participating in evil. Or materially, right? And the material cooperation, that can be something that's very, very remote or very, very proximate. So maybe an example of that would be, and I hate to bring up the abortion, but I mean, that's fairly, on the ballot for us in Missouri here. But okay, so a formal act of evil in the case of abortion would be, I'm a doctor and I perform abortions, or I'm a nurse and I assist in abortions, or I get an abortion or help get an abortion, right? Those would be formal acts in that action. Material may be something like this. I may work in a hospital, and my job in that hospital is to put together kits that are used in surgery. Now, some of those kits are used for abortion. Some of those kits are used for like open heart surgery or whatever, right? I don't get to choose what they use that for. I just put the kit together and it goes there. I am still materially cooperating in this evil, but I'm more remote from it because I don't really have the say in what, in order to actually keep my job, I have to do this. And you could say, well, couldn't you get another job? Well, maybe, maybe not, right? That's a matter of discernment too. Maybe an example of a more remote or more proximate form of that would be, my job is to make kits, and that kit I know is misused for these particular procedures for abortion, right? So I'm not actually getting the abortion, I'm not actually performing it, I'm not getting it, I'm not even helping with it, but I am preparing something that I know is going to be used for it. So that's like more of a proximate material cooperation, where the other side would be more of a remote material cooperation. So the same thing applies to the voting booth, right? So in other words, what the bishop is saying there is that I vote for this candidate because they support this intrinsically evil action, I'm formally cooperating in that evil, right? Whereas I'm not voting for this candidate because they support that position. I'm actually voting for this candidate because they support this other position that is actually, in my mind, better for society, right? No matter, the problem with us, with our political system, is that if you vote for one of the candidates, you're going to engage in at least material cooperation.
You jump into that.
You're going to have to,
yeah,
right? Regardless. Which again, that's why I say you could have the option to say I'm going to write in a candidate or not vote. Okay. Now that's for candidates. So we got that out of the way, right? What about amendments? What about particular ordinances? What about particular things that are being voted into law? Well, the same thing would apply, right? When we talk about particular amendments or policies that are going to be enacted into law, we are still called to use our conscience, right? And part of that is okay, what is the object of this particular law? Is it good or bad? What are the intentions of this law? Are they good or bad? And what are the circumstances of this law? Are they good or bad? When it comes to morality, only one of those needs to be bad for it to be a bad thing, right? To be a good thing, all three of them need to be good. So we're looking at Amendment 3. There's a lot of issues with Amendment 3. The first issue, which is not necessarily a moral issue, it's more of a grammatical issue, is that the wording of it is open to much interpretation. That was one of the issues starting off, even going back to last November, was when these things were put out, it was put in the courts, and the question was, is it clear what this is actually saying? And I think the answer to that actually is no. Now, the Missouri Supreme Court seems to think otherwise. I don't know. In some of my correspondence with other people, it's interesting how many different people interpret it differently. But at its worst, let's say, right, which is maybe, let's say you have malicious intent and you want to interpret the law in the worst possible way, right? And we'll give you the best possible way. In the worst possible way, there's wording in there that could allow abortion up to 9 months of pregnancy, which would follow suit with other amendments that are put in other state legislations in other states around the country. It takes away parental consent for minors. So in other words, if a young woman...
I gotta read it again. I just did not read any of this.
Yeah, if you have a young man or a young woman that want to procure abortion, there's no requirement to get a parental consent on that, which also leads to a slippery slope of allowing parental consent for irreversible permanent surgeries that could be done to a minor, right? It also takes away liability for doctors that maybe either cause harm to a woman in a botched abortion or causing some other harm to a woman in the procedure, right? So in other words, if let's say a woman were to procure an abortion, or maybe after the abortion was done, there was some kind of issue, like there was an artery nicked or something like that, that was the doctor's fault, they can't be held liable. They can't be sued, right? There can't be no justice for that, right? And I think finally, and this is not necessarily a moral issue, but it does lead to more the material cooperation. It also is actually to be taxpayer funded, right? So Amendment 3, I don't see a moral justification that one in good conscience can actually vote yes on it.
I have a question.
Yeah, please.
Rape and incest. To me, it seems immoral.
Yeah. Oh, certainly it is.
Have that woman, well, I mean, the acts are of course immoral, but I mean, it seems immoral to force a woman by virtue of, she's not gonna go to another state or have a, backdoor doctor at her disposal or whatever. Let's assume to carry that pregnancy. That just seems so.
No, I mean, I honestly understand that, it's sort of a reminder, I guess, of that trauma, right?
Why
and so
couldn't it say except in cases of rape or incest?
Well, okay, so here's the moral stance on that, right? Does one unjust and immoral act justify another immoral act?
Well, I know the answer is no,
right.
But I mean, the reality of it is.
No, I understand. I mean, there's the ideal and there's also the practicality. So, in other words, okay, so we're talking about morality. So maybe make it clear too. When we're talking about morality, we're talking about objectively wrong, right? That's different than sinfulness. Let's just be clear about that, because sinfulness is always subjective. So in other words, okay, let's say you have a woman that is suffered rape or incest, and because of that, the trauma they experience, because they feel that maybe they don't think there's any other option, there's not like a complete deliberation of the intellect and the will, they procure an abortion. We would say that was wrong, that's objectively wrong, but I can't say that was a sin for that person, right? Which is, we want to be clear about that, right?
Yeah.
Because in order to be sinful, there has to be some understanding, there has to be an act of the will involved with that. Now, anecdotally, or even let's just say statistically, those cases are very, 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 very low. Now, not to say that's justified, but in reality, that's very, very rare. And I will even say and this is anecdotally, one thing, my personal role is on the Respect Life Apostolate. I work as a spiritual director and I'm on the board. And also I've had the privilege and the honor and the grace to serve in abortion healing ministry. So I have counseled, spoken, worked with women who've experienced that. And one in particular that actually had the child in that. Now, again, this is anecdotal, but she was so happy she did.
Sure.
And the reason being, now again, no one's saying you have to keep the child. I mean, because there are alternatives when it comes to, like, you know, adoption or whatever else. But what we tend to find, and I think this is also something that's kind of, actually I'm going to be talking about in the homily this weekend, but also that's sometimes swept under the rug and not really addressed. That abortion doesn't just kill the life of a child, it also destroys the life of the mother. That women, whatever the circumstances, when they actually have this happen to them, there's not only a trauma that lasts with them, that takes a long time to overcome. Their emotional, their psychological, their spiritual well-being is shattered.
Yeah.
Right? And so what I've seen in abortion healing ministry is actually miracles, where these women now are on a path of health, not just physically, but mentally, spiritually, and emotionally. Where, you know, we live in a time where shout your abortion is something that's really kind of thrown out there, and, you know, shout your abortion, which is championed.
Shout your
Yeah.
Oh.
We live in a society that kind of does that. And the problem with that is, even statistically, what's shown is that women that go through these, a majority of them do suffer these other issues. And not only just that, but it actually kind of happens subconsciously. So what it leads for a lot of women is alcohol, drug abuse, promiscuity, and also just kind of a drive to kind of get riskier and riskier in their life, right? Again, that's kind of based on certain studies. And the real problem with all this too is that there's not really a lot of studies that are done with women post-abortive. They're starting to have some now. And what they're kind of showing is that a lot of women experience the same thing. And it's unfortunate.
Well, that's where all the issues are interconnected. Like, I don't know anything about Vitae Foundation other than hearing, you know, the sportscaster promoted on the radio. But to me, that's always the issue. If what support do they get to carry the child? Are they, you know, financially incentivized because it's expensive to have a, you know,
that's an interesting point. And here's the thing about that, right? Not many people know this. There are actually 6 times more crisis pregnancy centers in the United States that support a woman before, during, even after their pregnancy with the things you're talking about.
In St. Louis?
Same. We actually have more, so we have much more pregnancy crisis centers that do that for women than abortion clinics. But if you were to Google, pregnancy help in Google, what's the first thing that pops up?
Probably an abortion clinic.
Planned Parenthood.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, I mean, that's a valid question, but I think the answer to that has been, yeah, there is. The problem is people don't know about it. Right. Yeah.
Is there still that one behind the cathedral?
Well, I mean, the nice thing about that one is that they're no longer performing abortions out of that facility.
Oh, not Planned Parenthood. There was a.
Oh yes, yes. There is, yes, there still is, yes, right, yeah, and yeah, those are actually much more prevalent than people know. There are a lot of places.
Well, that's something we can do then, is to get the word out
about
that.
Amen. I'm with you on that, Pat. I'm with you on that, right? So yeah, because again, we approach this from a whole person. We're saying, yeah, because it would be wrong to say, yeah, don't have the abortion, good luck.
Right.
Right. The church has stepped up and said, no, we have these places you can go to and have that support and that healing. Right.
Okay.
So, so again, I think it's always important to recognize that. And I think, thank you for bringing that up, because I think that's important that people know. Right. And that's one of the ministries, that's one of the big things that RLA is doing right now, is trying to promote these things and saying, look, there's help for you. As a matter of fact, in the bulletin and this week in the homily, I'm going to be talking a lot about that.
Good.
Yeah. So good. That's all I got. Any questions, comments, concerns, heresies? It's a very loaded topic. I'm glad you guys came, so I appreciate that.
I'm glad you spoke on it.
I
Thank
do
you.
have a question.
Yeah.
The vote no on Prop 3 sign in our yard.
Mm-hmm.
I'm fine with that, but
Yeah.
I was sharing with a Catholic friend, and she was pretty appalled that what Angela Morisi does that too. It was her comment.
All the parishes are.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's her.
Yeah.
So, but she didn't. It didn't really sit well with her.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm fine with
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
You know.
No, that's good. Yeah, I think what that comes down to is some might say, hey, isn't it a violation of your 501c3 standing as a charitable organization? Because
why would that be?
Well, okay, so some people may misunderstand that a charitable organization of 501c3 cannot promote or support a particular candidate.
Oh, okay.
Right?
All right.
So people can construe that as, well, wait a minute, aren't you supporting a candidate? No.
You're saying how you
Because
feel
here's the
on an
thing.
amendment.
Exactly right. Both candidates don't support. Like, they both have policies that are not in line with that, right?
Yeah.
This is primarily an amendment on the state constitution that the church has an obligation to form the conscience and say, here are the problems with this. And if you support this, you are formally cooperating in evil. That's what the church is saying by saying this, right? Now, I understand people might get upset about that. And what I encourage open conversation, but also, and I don't know if this is the case for everybody, but it seems to be sort of sometimes the case, that usually if there's a guttural feeling about that, I find that usually that particular person has had some touch, maybe not personally going through it, but had some touch with someone who has gone through an abortion. And in some ways, it's like, hey, look, you're having compassion. I understand that, but we have to talk about the truth, right? And that's what we're called to do. That's what it comes down to. Which is also why we have these things that people can go to and provide that healing and understanding. And we hope that those that are touched by it do, right? For sure. Great.
Oh, that video, the email that comes out and the two priests were on YouTube.
Yeah.
But then they referred to a document. Where was that? It wasn't
Well,
anywhere.
Well, I think we were talking about sending it out. I guess I should have watched it before I sent it out. But the document was attached to the video, and so if people want that, we can send that out too. We figured we didn't want to inundate everybody with everything. So
I would be interested.
Okay.
I was looking for it, but
Yeah.
it's not there.
Contact Chris, contact me. We'll make sure to get it.
Okay.
That'd be fine. All right.
All right. Good.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Is that the